Hi, I'm Keith Lipazinski with GMDC, and welcome to the Self-Care Learning Session. This one titled Power of Medical Affairs in Consumer Healthcare During These Transforming Years. You know, with self-care, at no time in the history have we experienced more opportunities regarding OTC and wellness solutions in the marketplace. The opportunities include creation of new consumer categories and products through recent changes with the FDA and beyond. So today, we will learn more about these opportunities and I think also the questions. Joining me today is Tom Rink, Director of Customer Industry Engagement, and also Peter Piliero, the Vice President and Head of Medical Affairs Americas for GSK Consumer Healthcare. Gentlemen, welcome. Tom, I'll throw it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. Yeah, hello, everybody. My name is Tom Rink, and as Keith mentioned, I'm the Director of Customer and Industry Development for GSK, and I'm also a GMDC board member. You know, one of the things that we strive for in the Self-Care Summit Content Committee itself is really identifying those topics and subject matter experts that can really provide value on those topics that are really emerging in the marketplace and are relevant for you in the audience itself relative to OTC solutions. It's not only about providing these OTC solutions, but it's really understanding what's changed relative to these solutions. And then not only that, but how it helps your company grow even further. You know, for the next 20 to 25 minutes, you know, we're not going to be presenting any slides. It's more of a conversation around some of the changes we're seeing. And really my challenge to the audience is, you know, to think about what will be the role medical affairs can play within your company in the future. And if you think about a lot of us in the audience, whether you're a retailer or a consumer packaged goods, we focus a lot on the transactional buy, sell. However, you know, there's an emerging thing happening right now where, one, we know consumers' OTC desires for products continues to grow, significantly outpacing the marketplace, not only in existing categories, but also emerging categories. Additionally, we know, one, consumers are much more savvy. They're leveraging technology, they're moving to social media, and it continues to redefine how they receive their information, and in some cases, misinformation on either the safety and efficacy of OTC products or just perceptions around what the products do and what they may not do. And, you know, with that as a backdrop, I'm really pleased to introduce to you Dr. Peter Piliero. Dr. Piliero, sorry for hacking your name, Pete, is currently the Vice President of Head of Medical Affairs for GSK Consumer Healthcare. And in his role, he really leads medical and scientific professionals working across various consumer categories to provide innovative solutions for consumers. Dr. Piliero is recognized as a medical affairs expert, having held a number of leadership positions over his last 16 years at Merck, Boehringer Ingelheim, as well as Mallinckrodt. Since 2017, Pete has been very active as a member of the Medical Affairs Professional Society, and is currently is on the board of directors. Prior to joining the pharmaceutical industry, Pete practiced for 11 years as an infectious disease specialist, providing patient care and conducting clinical research at Albany Medical College. So with that, first I want to welcome Dr. Piliero.
Hey, thanks very much, Tom. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you again. And, the first question I want to share to give the background to the consumer or to the retailers is, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got in that industry itself.
Sure. Well, first of all, again, thanks to you and Keith for the introduction and for being able to have this opportunity to speak to some of our customers. First and foremost, I'm a clinician. As you mentioned, I've practiced for many years prior to joining the pharma industry. And in fact, I was involved with HIV care and HIV research, and really enjoyed that part of my life. But I then transitioned to industry and ended up being in Med Affairs the last 16 years. And one of the great things about Med Affairs is that it's a very science-oriented, clinically oriented group. And that's become more important over the years in both the pharmaceutical industry on the innovative side, but also on the consumer healthcare side. And what we do is we use that clinical and scientific acumen to understand the science, and then combining it with consumer insights, it helps us develop innovations that consumers want and need. And so over the last 16 years, I took that background of clinical and clinical research, and that allowed me and the teams that I've led to impact hundreds of thousands of patients and consumers across many different therapeutic categories. And so my touch, if you will, or my impact, I think has grown since moving to industry as a result of being in medical affairs.
Thanks, Pete. So, for a number of us in the audience, whether retailers or CPG, medical affairs conversations may be new. How should we think about medical affairs, its role, and why it's important really to making consumers' lives better?
Yeah, so I think medical affairs is maybe the part of the industry that's least well understood. And fortunately, I've been able to be a leader within Med Affairs for many years now. And as you mentioned, on the board of directors of the Medical Affairs Professional Society. And as such, I've helped to evolve the function within the industry to be a function that is a key strategic partner to our R&D colleagues and to our commercial colleagues, with the goal that we want to ensure patients and consumers are able to get the right solutions at the right time. And so Med Affairs professionals usually serve as the liaison or connection between the industry and customers. And those customers that we interact with are quite broad. They include patients and consumers, retailers, advocacy groups, professional associations, and key opinion leaders. It's very broad. And in that role, we help to ensure that all of those groups that we interact with, all those customers we interact with, understand the latest science, both broadly and the science associated with our products. And we do that because we feel an important responsibility of the medical affairs function is to help enable and ensure the safe and effective use of our products by consumers or patients.
That's great. So Pete, as I think about this audience, and one of the things that retailers challenge CPG companies is about, identifying areas of unmet consumer needs, medical needs. How does medical affairs help to translate these unmet needs into products?
Yeah, so really important. And again, this is where the medical affairs professionals having a clinical scientific background really help to make a difference. So I think two examples I can go through that I think will help show how science leads to products. So let's start with pain. Pain is a very common problem for people. And some recent research, almost 95% of US adults between the ages of 25 and 65 feel aches and pains on a daily basis. Pretty profound number there. On top of that, or layer on top of that, that the opioid epidemic has had a huge impact in the US and probably globally as well. But certainly in the US, we know this is a real challenge for people and communities. So then you say, okay, if we've got a lot of pain, we've got this opioid epidemic, are there solutions that we could innovate on that would help address both issues? And so you look at ibuprofen then and acetaminophen as two commonly used over-the-counter pain relievers that work and treat pain by different mechanisms. So GSK, and again, before my time, so I can't take much credit for this, but we're starting to work on a new innovation to address these needs. And that led to the launch of Advil Dual Action, which combines ibuprofen and acetaminophen, but provides it in lower amounts of each ingredient per day, which may be better for the consumer. And also then provides 8-hour pain relief. So I think this is something new for consumers and new for the pain space that should make a difference and meet their needs. You mentioned earlier wellness, so let's just switch over to the wellness side. And certainly the COVID-19 pandemic has fueled a lot of things, including having a virtual meeting like this, but also really fueled a wellness space. Consumer self-care to support their immune health has become a focal point for them, in part because they want to either stay well or they want to reduce the risk of getting COVID-19. And so they're looking for solutions to try to put them in a place to stay healthy. So many companies like GSK have therefore ramped up their consumer offerings to meet these needs and have really tried to think innovatively, what can we do to help consumers feel well and or stay well? And so I think you've seen not just us, but other companies do similar things. And again, why? Because consumers want and need this. And I think as a result of COVID, the focus on wellness is only going to continue to grow. And so I see this trend being something that we'll see going on for quite some time.
Great. Thanks, Pete. So another area that we've heard about in the OTC space that's emerging, that it may not be emerging in that it's been around for a little bit, but I would like for you to talk about is, self-diagnostics and self-care. I mean, you think about the 23andMe's and, it's really helped consumers think differently about their wellness and the tools that are available. Can you talk about the self-diagnostic space?
Yeah, so I think oftentimes when we talk about, consumer health, we think about, pills or gummies or things that we take. But I think there really is an opportunity and a need for self-diagnosis or self-diagnostics. So, and in thinking about this, this is not necessarily new, to your point. Pregnancy testing, there's a self-diagnostic. Checking on when you're ovulating, that's not a diagnostic, but it's another area of self-care that puts a tool in the hands of a consumer to help them, address pregnancy. So I think, again, if we talk about COVID-19, because we spend a lot of time these days talking about COVID-19, there's a real opportunity here as well in regard to self-diagnostic tools. And as we enter the winter season and have concerns about dual epidemics of influenza or COVID-19, one I think could imagine that it could be quite valuable if we could go to a store and pick up a self-diagnostic for influenza or COVID-19 or strep throat. I mean, a lot of these conditions, and particularly influenza and COVID, have a lot of overlapping symptoms. And I know certainly when my son called us a week ago and said, "Hey, I've got a fever, I'm really feeling achy." First question was, is it COVID? Because that's what's really on top of mind. But could it be influenza? And he had to go to a testing site to get tested. But boy, wouldn't it be great to be able to have in your medicine cabinet an influenza diagnostic that you could pull out, test yourself, and get a result and know what you're dealing with. I think there's a real opportunity here, and I think consumers will value this and not having to, again, put themselves in harm's way, potentially, of going to a testing center or going to an HCP's office to get their test. So, again, I think we're going to see more of this going forward.
Thanks, Pete. I can tell you, being as part of the CHIPA organization, they've now formulated a new group to focus in on, consumer medical devices in particular. So, yeah, this is going to be a big opportunity for us in the consumer space as well as the retailer space. So I want to turn a little bit to another area, which is, how does medical affairs help the industry communicate to consumers? Now more than ever, there's so much access to data out there. It's really important that the appropriate messaging gets out there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why I love medical affairs and why I've been in med affairs the entire time I've been in the industry is that it's science-based, and a big part of our role is to be customer-facing. We're again that liaison between R&D and commercial, between development and marketing, and we help communicate that science to the customers, in this case, consumers. So let me sort of talk about two key ways we do this. So first is we're responsible in Med Affairs for ensuring the trusted science, as we call it, that supports each of our products. It's the basis of why we put a product out there for consumers, and we hold on to that ownership of trusted science by making sure that it's properly represented in promotional materials and external communications that the company may have. And a big way we do that is by helping translate the science, which can be complex, into consumer-friendly language. So that's one way that I'd say we help communicate to consumers, even though it's indirect because it's really our commercial colleagues who are doing that communication. We need to do that translation from science to consumer-friendly language. The second way we can help with customer-facing communications is to have Med Affairs engage with our retailers' clinical staff. And so I've got this scientifically focused team, all with, or most with, doctoral degrees, whether it be medical degree, PharmD, PhD, who can provide the necessary product and scientific education to help retailers understand the offerings, but also potentially help the retailers implement their own customer engaging health programs. And so, we're here and available to partner with you. And it's something that I think we find fulfilling, again, because it gets us closer to the customer and helping the customer.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, there's no question. I think I can speak for a lot of the retailer communities with, categories like vitamins, minerals, and supplements, and a lot of the different categories that have really grown disproportionately. The questions around immune, there's certainly a need to help, bring a science-based background into the conversation so that, as we continue to hear this information, retailers have the ability to talk with someone in medical affairs. To that point, the question I would ask is, if you think about where we were 20 years ago in the industry and we think about it today, do you see the need for retailers and consumer packaged goods companies to transform how they work together around information?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe let me just follow up on the last point you made around wellness and vitamins. I have, just as an example, on my US team, I've got 3 dietitians, registered dietitians, and 1 nutritional scientist. These guys are the experts, right? They understand the science. So it's by having people like that that we can help address information and educational needs. So, and I think misinformation, unfortunately, is a common issue these days that we also are able to hopefully help with. So, how can we work together? So, certainly, often we know that retailers will have questions regarding the information on our packages in regard to directional use statements or claims that the product is making, and how they're presented to either themselves as the retailer or consumers. And what I would want to impart to this group today watching this is that, know that you have medical affairs personnel, people like me and my team, who are available to address or answer any questions that you have around the science or around the product from a scientific standpoint. And the better we can help you with that, the better you and your staff can help address consumer questions when they come to you in the retail setting.
Great, thanks. So one of the things I mentioned earlier, Pete, is really around this emergence of social media and, really the speed of information, as well as, just consumers' interest in understanding the knowledge around products and categories. How has your role changed with some of this new focus areas around social media and technology and digital? How has medical affairs changed?
Yeah, so as I sort of mentioned earlier, medical affairs has really evolved over the last number of years. When I first joined the industry, medical affairs was very much in its infancy, but it really stayed in its infancy for quite some time. And I think the exciting part for me and Med Affairs as a whole is that we really have evolved to be much more strategic. When it comes then to social media and technology, or digital, as it's called under that one word name, this is an area that absolutely pharma and consumer healthcare companies are looking at, and specifically medical affairs departments really want to get their hands around this and have the capabilities to take advantage of or utilize, again, digital in their work. So let me maybe give you a couple of examples. So there's a lot of data out there, right? And consumer healthcare companies have customer relations teams and medical information teams who are fielding questions from consumers or retailers or healthcare providers. Well, what are we doing with all that data? It's often not mined the way it could be. So one of the big focus areas is saying, how do we look at this pool of data and maybe apply what's called NLP, or natural language processing, or other artificial intelligence or AI type solutions to actually pull out the insights, the consumer insights or the HCP insights, and then use those to develop new innovation to help meet their needs. So that's one big one, and that's a real hot topic in the industry right now. But as well, there's lots of other quote unquote digital things you can do. One is, how can we in medical affairs have a more what we call omni-channel approach to medical information, to be able to put out in different channels information that's science-based. What about wearables? I've got my Apple Watch on right now. I use it all the time. There's an incredible amount of data there. How can we think about wearables and our products and tapping into that data? And then there's this whole new area that we call digital opinion leaders. And these are people who have a social media presence and sometimes science-based, sometimes not science-based, but they are influencing people through either information, hopefully correct, or misinformation. So how do we engage with those folks to make sure the right, correct, trusted science is getting out there? Maybe one last thing I'll talk about is a more simple area, which is just utilizing technology to engage. So we're doing this today using technology, but last week my team had a virtual engagement with a number of medical experts, and we did that through having a virtual advisory board, and it worked perfectly, and it allowed us to continue to engage even during COVID and get advice that we needed from our experts to help us continue to advance the science around one of our product categories that we're in. So I think we're going to see more and more of this as we continue to work from home for quite some time. I think we're going to really have to embrace the technology.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, I'm technology challenged, so I'm learning as everyone else is. Another area, and this is the last two questions for me that I thought about was, what are some of the emerging areas that will help consumers in their journey around health and wellness that our retailers really need to know about?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of emerging areas that are, as I mentioned earlier, really coming from an increased consumer interest in taking wellness and self-care into their own hands. And it ranges from reactive self-care. So the example I used earlier of my son having a fever, that's sort of that reactive self-care. Okay, what do I need to do now? How can I handle this myself with solutions that are out there? To proactive or preventative well care, which again, I'd say it goes back to the example of COVID and people having more interest in wellness products. In addition, other examples are the emergence of more naturally inclined foods and medicines. An example of this would be the evolution of CBD, which is still in its infancy, but certainly many companies are exploring this, are doing research to really say, are there science-based claims on the benefits of CBD? And again, for Med Affairs, it's that trusted science. Do we believe there is science that supports a potential benefit for consumers? I think also consumers are having this desire to better understand their own health, their own body, their own set of circumstances. We are individualized, right? So that they can personalize their care. And interestingly, on the innovative pharma side, we talk about personalized medicine, but here I would talk about sort of personalized care. And sometimes this involves the use of technology, as we were talking about a moment ago. So things like 23andMe, where they do a genetic analysis, or vitamin companies or companies that have vitamin offerings, where they're offering to test people's hair to do an analysis that then helps give advice on what vitamins might be best for them. So I think what we need to do in this industry, and certainly in medical affairs, is learn how do we leverage the technology to drive wellness. Because consumers want to be able to do more of this understanding and testing in the comfort of their own homes to then be able to choose the products and services that they think may help them stay well.
Great. Thanks, Pete. So the last question is really in this area of, these emerging areas. And I'm going to ask you to take your, or leverage your experience from Med Affairs, but put yourself in the position of a retail buyer. What are the questions that a retail buyer should be asking when a consumer packaged goods company comes in these emerging areas? Because, I can only imagine how many companies and products will be bringing consumer solutions, but as they think about it through the lens of a medical affairs, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I have to say, I've been back in the consumer space now for a little over 4 months, having joined GSK in June, and it's really raised my awareness to the amount of consumer goods that are out there, particularly in the health and wellness space. And how does one weed through all of these offerings? So I think the way I would suggest you all think about this is when we come to you with some new offering, or somebody else, another CPG comes to you with a company with a new offering, is maybe these 4 sort of questions. Has the company demonstrated that there is truly an unmet need in the marketplace for this offering? Is this truly something consumers need? And that should, again, all of what we do should be driven by what consumers' needs are, what the insights are that we learn from them. So that's number 1. Second, has the company been able to demonstrate that there is actually going to be a benefit to the consumer if they use this product or service? So again, why make something available if it's not going to actually potentially help people? Third, has the company been able to share with suppliers and retailers the scope and scale of the opportunity? So now that's more where people like Tom are going to help you versus me as the medical guy. But it's the reality of, right, is this something that is really an opportunity for you all as well as the consumer? And then finally, and this is really comes right back to Med Affairs, is has the company been able to substantiate the claims of the product or service through foundational science and research? What is the trusted science surrounding this product, or is there not trusted science? And you should raise those questions. You should ask those questions. You should be skeptical, and we should be able on our side to be able to prove to you, here's the evidence, here's the data, here's what supports that this is something that your consumers want and need. So I think that's the approach that I would probably take.
Great. So Dr. Pagliaro, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know how busy you are, given not only the joint venture between GSK and Pfizer, and just really getting our innovation and making sure that what we're focused on is science-based and really does what our mission as a company is, which is to make people's lives better. And so I want to thank you for that. For the audience, I would say, the key takeaway, and I know that this is a little bit unique and different from a lot of the other topics that we have in the Self-Care Summit. The key takeaway here is to recognize that there's a lot of information out there, potential misinformation. And as you're building your OTC business, it's going to be really important for you as a retailer to ask those questions, to understand how these consumer packaged goods companies are bringing products to the market, and are they creating value not only for yourselves as a retailer, but through the lens of a consumer and making their lives better. That's going to be the difference maker from a retailer perspective. I would suggest, in closing, that if you have questions on any of the products, please contact your sales person for that particular company, and make sure that you ask to understand exactly what it is that the portfolio offering is. And as you think about your business day to day, really incorporate medical affairs a little bit more into the conversation, so that you can really figure out what's real moving forward, and what could potentially be something that comes and goes. So thank you again, Dr. Pierre. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Keith.
Hey, Tom, it was a great recap. And Pete, it's just heartwarming as a consumer myself, and I think the one thing as we move forward, as we've moved forward as an organization in titling this self-care, is basically exactly what you said. Is number one, how to, consumers want to take more control not only of their health, but also how can they prevent and be well, et cetera. And it's great, we talked about the consumer being the core. You approach it that same way as far as what they need and et cetera. And number one, to make sure that they're, as you said, safe and effective, to make sure that consumer can be that way. And finally, Tom, I think you're right, and Pete too, is the engagement between retailers and medical affairs is probably a untapped source, especially as you're both trying to engage with the consumers, again, back in the stores. So terrific information. Again, I appreciate, Pete, as Tom said, your time. I know you're a busy person. Take the time and come and share your input and thoughts, and that we tap into your community at the same time. So again, thank you, Pete, very much.
Thank you.
And Tom, thank you, and the entire GSK Consumer Healthcare team for your support with this event. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.